Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Zhces Center for Education Studies, I welcome you all to our today's seminar on Indian higher education, where is it in global perspective. In recent years, especially with the introduction of National Education Policy NEP 2020, India's global aspirations in terms of its higher education has become evident, and it is in fact picking up at a rapid pace. Private universities in India are increasingly collaborating with foreign universities to offer various kinds of workshops, courses, and even joint degrees. And foreign universities and governments are also equally interested in expanding their influence in India. While the aspiration of internationalizing Indian higher education is certainly underway, we also need to critically reflect on not just how such an aspiration promises to meet the distinct social, cultural, and political needs of our society, but also to what extent this aspiration coincides or deviates from the current realities of Indian higher education, and how both the aspirations and realities of Indian higher education are perceived globally. It is this global perspective that we hope to address today through this seminar and hopefully ignite some vibrant conversations and exchange of ideas around it. With this, I now invite Professor Arvind Kumar Mishra to kindly welcome the audience and our distinguished guest.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Very good afternoon to everybody, and I welcome all of you to this important event in our center. And I am particularly very happy that three stalwarts working on Indian higher education and higher education in general are present. It is a rare occasion that you find three big scholars, on one platform. My colleague Dr. Pradeep Chaudhary will be giving detailed introduction about all of them, but it is my pleasant duty to welcome all three. So, sir, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and we look forward to learning a lot from your experience, from your discourse. And let me do a pleasant duty to present a bouquet to our guests. So, yes, Sangeeta, can you give me that? So, Professor Philip Altbach. Professor Tilak. As I said that my colleague Dr. Pradeep Chaudhary will be giving detailed introduction about the program as well as about the speaker. So now may I invite Dr. Pradeep Chaudhary to come on dais and introduce the theme of the seminar.
Dear Professor Altbach, Professor Tilak, Professor Varghese, faculty colleagues, my dear students and friends, a very good afternoon to all. I join Professor Mishra to welcoming you to the center and to the seminar in particular. This is again I join with him saying that this is one of the rarest occasions for all of us, as we could be able to invite three eminent scholars working in the area of Indian higher education and development for more than 3 decades, to 4 decades I would say. Professor Altbach, Professor Tilak, Professor Varghese, three of them are working for a long time on Indian higher education and its development. So they have seen how actually the Indian higher education system has transformed over time. And we all have gained from their writings, readings, and their discourse. We sincerely thank each of them for agreeing to join the event and to keep their views, which would certainly enlighten each of us. My task two, one is I need to introduce the chair and the speakers. Second one is I will introduce the topic a bit. But I feel that performing both the tasks in front of such eminent scholars are difficult. I am taking the risk of doing that. Let me first do my first part. I will be very brief in introducing each of the speakers. Else, the entire time allocated for the program will be less for this. even if I go for a detailed discussion, given the extensive work they have done in the area of higher education and development. Professor Tilak is a well-known economist of education in the country with the publication of over a dozen of books, and I would say that it is not less than 400 papers in the area of economics of education and development. He is former professor and vice chancellor of NIPA, now NIPA, National University of Educational Planning and Administration, and also ICSR National Fellow and presently distinguished professor at the Council for Social Development at New Delhi. He is also the visiting professor at IIT Hyderabad. Some of his recent, he has published extensively in the area, and some of his recent publications include Economics of Engineering Education, recently came in 2024, Higher Education, Public Good and Markets, Education and Development, Critical Issues in Public Policy and Development, Education and Development, Dilemmas in Reforming Higher Education in India, Trade in Higher Education, and many. He was the editor of the Journal of Educational Planning and Administration for a long time, and the articles that come from that journal shapes many of our thinkings or research in education and higher education. He also served as the president of Comparative Education Society of India and is on the board of Comparative Education Society of Asia as well. Professor Tilak served on several committees on education and related issues formed by Government of India, UGC, Planning Commission, now it is Niti Aayog, and many other international bodies. He is the recipient of several awards for his outstanding contributions to the field of education research. With all happiness, I wish to say that I got an opportunity to be nurtured by him as a scholar at NIPA, a capital that I will be holding for my entire life. Thank you, sir, for being here. Professor Altbach holds a long and distinguished research and teaching career in higher education, particularly in the area of internationalization of higher education. Currently, he is the Emeritus Professor and Distinguished Fellow at the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College, a great place for learning, I would say. In my recent visit to Harvard, I visited that place and I found it is so lively and fantastic that I would say that every one of us who are working in the area of higher education at least takes a pride of visiting that. Let's feel that we should visit that place, so vibrant place, and the collegiality, the discourse that happens in that place. And he is the brainchild of that center is the brainchild of Professor Altbach. So he has created a discourse, a different discourse in that place. He was also the Monan University professor there for a long time. He was the 2024-26 Distinguished Scholar Leader of the New Century Scholar Initiative of the Fulbright Program. He has been given several other international awards and prizes to him for his outstanding research in the area of higher education. He has taught at Harvard University, the University of Wisconsin, and the State University of New York. His book, Global Perspectives on Higher Education, is a well-read book by researchers and students in higher education. Even if you have at any case not seen that book, I must recommend that you should go. I have immensely benefited by reading that book. He also co-edited the book, The Road to Academic Excellence and American Higher Education in the 21st century. Professor Altbach did his study from undergrad to PhD from the University of Chicago. Thank you, Professor Altbach, for joining with us, and we are always eager to listen to you. Professor N.B. Varghese is currently a distinguished professor at IIT Bombay and former Vice Chancellor of NIPA New Delhi. He was the founding director of the Center for Policy Research in Higher Education, a think tank of its first of its kind, I would say, in the country in the area of higher education. Indian Higher Education Report is the brainchild of Professor Varghese that comes every year starting from 2015. I must say that this is an important reference for the students working in the area of higher education and development, and we must follow that, and I keep following it religiously, that report. We feel proud to say that Professor Varghese is an alumnus of our center, Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies, and we take privilege to say that, we take proud to say that he is doing, he has contributed so much of knowledge in the area of higher education, development, and social policy. He is the former head of governance and management in education at the International Institute for Educational Planning, IIEP in UNESCO in Paris. He has been the focal point for the Antrip Network, member of several international boards, committees, and editorial boards and journals. He was the chief editor of the Journal of Educational Planning and Administration and Secretary General of International Working Group on Education. He has directed research projects in several countries. I have read a lot of his writings in the context of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. because he brings a very interesting global perspective to higher education. He has published several books and several research papers in the area of education and development. It's very difficult to say what are they because that is so long. Most of us will agree in this room, all are present, like all of us, not most even, all of us will be agreeing to the point that we have benefited immensely from the critical writings and discourses these three eminent scholars have created in the area of higher education and development. And we are feeling proud to be inviting them to our center. Thank you each of you again for joining. Now let me get into the second part, which is topic. I am equally afraid of saying about the topic in front of three eminent scholars. But let me put my perspective, what I have done in my life, what I have understood in the last 10 years of my career after my PhD. The topic for the seminar, today's seminar, is Indian higher education. Where is it in the global perspective? The landscape of tertiary education globally has changed significantly over the years, and it is continuing to change. Enrollment has been increasing in many countries, though in some countries it is also declining. In the other day, Professor Altbach was saying, because of demographic shifts. This is happening in parallel to the effects of globalization, demographic shifts, and technological advances. One of the significant recent development has been the growth of internationalization of tertiary education. Among many, this is one I find very, very interesting, and it is coming out very seriously in the policy discourse. There is a growing global movement of students, particularly from underdeveloped and developing countries to developed world. Indian Student Mobility Report 2023, which is titled as Beyond Beds and Boundaries, that estimates that the number of Indian students studying abroad was shockingly around over 1 million in 2019. It will likely be reached between 1.5 to 2 million by 2025. United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom and Australia are the most chosen destinations for Indian students. And almost I think 3/4 of the total students are going to these countries, if I am not wrong. As of 2023, there are approximately 850,000 Indian students enrolled across these 4 countries. The National Education Policy 2020, on which we have a greater amount of discourse now going on after it came in July 2020, that aims to attract greater number of international students to Indian higher education system, which is very low now. We have very less number of students in our higher education system who are from outside, and mostly those students come from South Asian and African countries. The policy aims to achieve the goal of internationalization at home by changing curriculum, also the credit system. High performing Indian universities will be encouraged to set up campuses in other countries, which is now also almost like started in some scale. And similarly, selected universities from outside will be setting up their campus here, so which is also visible to some extent. What I find across the globe, that there is a push for internationalization in almost everywhere. There is a high competition among countries to make their higher education globally competitive and also to attract students from other countries. Making money out of it is often said as the reason, what I have understood so far. Though there are several other motivations such as knowledge transfer, improving employability, improving skill, to mention a few. There are also debates on brain drain, and also brain gain and outflow of capital from developing to developed countries. So several questions and concerns are emerging in the area of internationalization of higher education globally, and certainly we need to create a well-informed debate on this issue. Without that, it's very difficult to understand actually what is happening in the internationalization of higher education. A few questions that comes to my mind, I think the panelists will definitely be touching in a sense, I know, given their expertise. Who gain and who loses in the process of internationalization? More importantly, who are the leading in this process? Who are the leader in the internationalization arena? Is it that only US, UK? But now we see that even people are getting into some Gulf countries to study. So who is the leader and what is actually happening in the process, and who is losing and who is gaining in the process? Are developed countries are exploiting to developing societies in some way or the other? How it is impacting the other aspects of the economy and society in the global south? While economic motive is the main one, we often discuss what are the other motives of developed countries in attracting students from developing economies. Is it only that they are for revenue maximization or getting money, or there is something else in their mind to attract students from developing countries? That also not much being said. How, for example, how geopolitics play a role in it. What Professor Altbach was saying in the other day in a recent seminar that concluded by NIPA, only it concluded yesterday. So there are many things, those are coming up in internationalization of higher education, and it's very, very important for all of us to lead that. So now we will be getting into that discourse, and let's continue this discussion. As we have three eminent scholars in this area, I don't think we can have an alternative to this panel. I can't even think of an alternative to this panel to discuss these issues in detail. So I won't want to be in between you and the panelists. Even I am very eager to listen to them. So let us get into the topic and then we can go ahead. Thank you again to all the three panelists for coming here, my teacher, my mentor. So it's always a great opportunity for me to talk here, though I am scared, but I took that risk to speak. Thank you very much.
Now I request Professor Tilak to kindly take over the session as the chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. I take this opportunity essentially to express how distinctly and uniquely privileged I feel today to be here in this room, which I visited quite a few times earlier. But this visit is particularly significant as we have a great speaker, Professor Philip Altbach, in this session. And Professor Philip Altbach is not new to India, and India is not new to him. In the sense that he visited quite a few places in India. In fact, he worked for his PhD from India, from Daughters of Social Sciences, and has extensively worked. I had the privilege of knowing him long ago, knowing him in physical person a few decades ago, and knowing him through his readings, of course, much longer, and also got an opportunity to work on a couple of publications with him. And I indeed feel privileged with those opportunities that I got, and this particular opportunity today I have to listen to him. In fact, if you are looking for a global higher education policy analyst, I think we have a top-ranking person here with us today. That is Professor Philip Altbach. He is not only a global higher education policy analyst, I think he is also an important, very high-level higher education policy analyst in India, because his knowledge of Indian system is so deep and so insightful. So I'm really looking forward, along with all of you, to have his insightful, deep, sincere and serious comments on what is happening in India in the global perspective. Particularly in a context in which we are in, I think higher education can be described as in critical roads in India. We have a new policy on education which was introduced in 2020, which has a large package of reforms that have been suggested, some of which have been long overdue, and some of which have been criticized, hailed by many as heartbreaking, revolutionary, radical, and it will thoroughly transform the entire education system and also entire country. And some have also criticized it, saying that there are several problems with quite a few reforms that were suggested, and a few of them, in fact, I don't say a few, perhaps equally good number of them also condemned the whole power policy. And I'm sure Professor Altbach will comment upon some of these things. And I think he's closely following with many of the developments that are taking place in India now, particularly after the policy has been introduced. So let me not take much more time. And I'm also grateful to Pradeep for giving me this opportunity, in which my colleague Zhces is also here, apart from Professor Philip Altbach. And of course, I get a chance to see many of the young scholars of this center, of this Jandhyala Research Center here. Thank you very much, and let me not take much time and invite Professor Philip Altbach to give the very special address.
Thank you. Does this properly work? This work? Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your Saturday to come to this not very appealing room and participate in this discussion. So I appreciate that.
Thank you for trying. We have deep problems of technology here. I hope this is going to be a conversation and not a lecture for several reasons. One is I'm not completely up to date on this topic. I'm going to make some generalizations about Indian higher education. Excuse me. I don't want to take too long, so I'm going to. This will tell me to be in the country. We also have an emerging and I think very important sector in higher education, and that are those are the elite, well-funded, new private universities. Several of them around here. Jindal Global University, where I spent the last couple of days actually. Ashoka, Shivnadar, a few in the south of the country, and so on. This is a revolutionary development in Indian higher education. These are new, these are well-funded. Most of them have really interesting and innovative ideas about higher education and are able, because of their resources, to implement those ideas. So this is, I think, one of the most promising sectors. At the same time, these are elite institutions for the elite. You know, that very few young people from disadvantaged backgrounds and so on are able to attend them because their scholarship programs are limited and the cost of attendance is quite high. But I think that these new privates are in many ways the most innovative and most interesting aspects of contemporary Indian higher education, and I'd be interested to hear any pushback or comment on that. I'm going to proceed with a number of generalizations about Indian higher education. I'm not going to go into very much detail about them, and you will have to tell me if those generalizations, and my two colleagues here can tell me also, if I'm right, because I might well not be. I'm not that much up to date on the system. And I mentioned a number of them in part to be provocative for this discussion. In this country, and I might say also, all that I'm going to say is well known to every single person in this room. So I'm not telling you anything new, but maybe bringing a slightly outsider perspective might focus some attention on it. The states, as we all know, have primary responsibility for higher education in India. Most students, above 90%, attend state-sponsored institutions or state-administered or state-evaluated institutions. And the Indian states, maybe with a couple of exceptions, actually I can't think of any, some of you may tell me, have provided inadequate support, inadequate thought, inadequate ideas about higher education. So we have the vast majority of students and institutions under the state governments, which almost without exception don't do a very good job. And I think that's really quite important. And you might say the system is bound to failure just for that reality. And very few states, maybe zero, provide adequate funding. The central universities do a better job, but most of them are not super fantastic either. Second generalization, the quality assurance system in this country, NAAC, and there are some others I think as well, overall is inadequate, overly bureaucratic, too complicated, and a drag on innovation. And it's not compulsory. So lots of institutions, I think, are not accredited by the quality assurance system at all. So it needs major renovation. And I do not know if the NEP has suggestions about that. Next generalization. Most Indian students are educated in the private sector, much of which is quite poor quality, unaided, and a lot of it, in fact, even if not in legal, for profit and or politically motivated. So that large sector of private higher education in the country needs attention, needs improvement, and needs better understanding. I don't think we know that much about what's going on in that private sector. Of special attention, of course, are the low-quality engineering colleges, which are reputed by everybody, including employers, to be educating people who are not suited for the workplace, and as a result, don't get decent jobs. There are, of course, some excellent private colleges, some of them religiously backed, some of them not, and we shouldn't forget about them, but they are a small part of the total system. Next generalization. There is an overall lack of autonomy in Indian higher education. I think one of the very interesting aspects of the new elite private sector is that they do have autonomy because they're not getting government funding, and they're pretty much so far left to develop on their own. But basically, the rest of the system is highly bureaucratized, and I think if you look at most other countries, maybe with the exception of China, you will find that the Indian system is very much bureaucratized, finds it very difficult to make changes, and so on. There is a tremendous lack of autonomy. So new ideas find it difficult to be developed and implemented in most of public government-sponsored higher education in the country. Next generalization. India has always had, in my view, and again, I really appreciate your comments, a problem with academic freedom. And I think this is exacerbated by the current situation in the country. But I've heard stories in my long experience of watching Indian higher education that professors tell me and students tell me, and there's been reporting on this, I don't think a lot of research, that you get in trouble if you say things which make the college principal unhappy, if you speak out in the newspapers and this sort of thing. And this is not just an artifact of the recent few years. This goes back a long time. It's probably maybe more difficult at the present time. But there's always been this issue of academic freedom, and we all know that the best universities in the world need academic freedom. They need to be able to both pursue research and analysis and critiques, sometimes of the society of which they are a part, freely, to be the best possible institutions that they can be. Many of the best Indian researchers and teachers, not to mention tech leaders and academic leaders, are not in India. The Indian academic diaspora is very large, and very important. And of course, we all think frequently of the guys, they're all guys, I think, who dominate the top management in Silicon Valley, the most important tech leaders in the United States. I think 2/3 of them, I haven't counted, are of Indian background. But there are also lots and lots of top Indian professors in all disciplines all around the Western countries, not only in the US, but in Australia, Britain, Canada, etc. And of course, we can see at the present time that the Prime Minister of the UK is of Indian background. Thus also is the Prime Minister of Ireland of Indian background. So Indians do great outside of India. They do pretty good in India too, but a lot of them feel it's worthwhile, important to leave. And I think we have to reflect, and I won't get into it here, maybe my colleagues can say a few things. We need to reflect as to why that is the case. And it's certainly the case that if you take the average academic salary and working conditions, even in upper and middle universities in the United States, it does not compare to the situation that one finds in India. So it's hard to return. So some countries, notably China, which has wanted to bring back its top scholars, has devoted a lot of money and attention to doing that with reasonable success, because they pay these guys, mostly men, top salaries which are equivalent to what they would make in the US or other Western countries. That is not the case here. Bureaucratically, it's impossible. I don't know if the new elite privates are doing or can do that kind of international recruiting. But it's an important thing to keep in mind, because a lot of the best Indian talent is not in India. Maybe that's okay. From a global standard, fine. But from a national point of view, difficult. We have in the United States and Canada, I counted them, about 20 Indians who are presidents of our top universities. The last two deans of the Harvard Business School, including the current one, are Indians. And one could go on and on. So, next to my final point is the rest of the system. What do you do about the central universities, the state universities, and this huge amount of colleges? What do you do about the affiliating system, which I think almost by definition is unmanageable, unbearably bureaucratic, and not functional? And I know there's been some reforms in recent years to permit top colleges to separate themselves from the affiliating system, and I think that's been a very good reform, and I think it's working out, but I'd be interested to hear your comments. So, how do you deal with this massive, massive system? And final couple of questions, which for all of us, and particularly my two exceedingly distinguished colleagues, does India have the potential to build world-class universities, and what will it take? That's the exam question for this seminar. And if you come up with the right answer, a Nobel Prize will be awarded to you. But it's a really serious question. And the new elite privates, they're probably too small, and it would take too much money. The big publics, the central universities, maybe, but India has always underinvested in higher education from the beginning, and even with NEP, still the case. If you look at your comparative countries, emerging middle-income countries, India underinvests in higher education and research. That has to stop, and I don't think it will. So there we are. And the final question is, what promise does the NEP have? Can it work? Can most of it work? Will internationalization, which you guys have mentioned already, really function? Will large numbers of foreign universities want to set up branch campuses in this country? My answer, no. And we can go into detail about why I think that if you want to. Will Indian universities have success in establishing branches overseas as part of sort of soft power that India is trying to project, and I think quite rightly so. And the answer to that question is, it's tough. And I've read about the new branch campus of one of the IITs, I think Madras, in Zanzibar. It's a joke. It's really small. It's very specialized. I don't know who's teaching there in just 2 disciplines, and I don't know who the students are. I've read someplace that a lot of them are actually Indians who can get around the entrance the IIT entrance exam by traveling over to Zanzibar. I don't know, but the point is, it's complicated. So with those comments, I want to conclude, and maybe if you're willing to hear reactions, arguments from 2 real experts, not some fake guy who sits on the other side of the world and observes at a distance. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your very perceptive questions on the Indian higher education. And I think the title of the seminar is "Where is it going?" Something like that. Whether the higher education is going. I think that's a $1 million question that we have. We still don't have a lot of answers for that. But I'll request Professor Burgess to reflect on some of the questions and also perhaps add some more issues for discussion. Professor Burgess.
This is what? Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. In fact, I came to listen to Professor Altbach and learn a little more things about higher education in India and globally. But I think Pradeep got hold of me and changed my seat to his side, and that is why I am here. Friends, it's always a pleasure to listen to Professor Altbach and also learn from his rich experience, vast experience, and he has the capacity to put the Indian higher education system in the global context. So what he talked about is not only about India, but also about many countries. So let me start with a sarcastic note. Professor Altbach asked a question: does India has the potential to become or create world-class universities? When ranking started in 2003 and 4, and it became a widespread discussion point in many places, Indian institutions did not appear anywhere, certainly at the top. So there are 2 ways in which we could respond. One is that we will improve the universities to become world-class. That is what China did. 985 programs and 211 programs, etc. were indicators. And if you see the ranking in the countries, in the context of South Africa, BRIC countries, you will find that if you take the top 10 institutions, now 6 of them are Chinese institutions and colleges. They made a lot of change in that aspect. India is always known for its shortcuts, not for the hard work. So what India did was that we started our own ranking system, so that our institutions will be certainly there if we have our own ranking system. That is how we started. But we waited 1 decade. We waited 1 decade. We started in 2015-16.
The countries also do this.
Yes, 2015. So we waited for 10 years of the global ranking, and we found that there is no way that we can reach anywhere close to that. So let us start our own ranking. And in our own ranking, our institutions are top ranking institutions here. So that is a shortcut solution that you have found. So my answer to the question is that we have shortcuts and strategies like this. But there is an effort that was made by the institutions of eminence. That is initially it was called, when the budget was allocated, it was called towards a world-class university. But then the government felt, if an evaluation is done after 10 years, how we reached world-class, there will be a problem. So we changed, and we changed to institutions of eminence. Now nobody can evaluate and say that we did not achieve the objectives. So that is a shortcut that India has as a second variety. So I think that is my answer to you. India has the potential, But the difficulty is that many a time when we have, as you very rightly pointed out, even after new education policy was released, launched in 2020, July 29th, the first budget, if you see it, that was in March 2021, what you find is that there are 7,000 crores decline in the allocations for higher education alone. So what we say as our aspirations and what is declared as our stated objectives are not very often getting translated into budgetary allocations, So as I have an interesting statement, that means, we are, if you consider higher education as a public good, we treat higher education as a public good without public support. And that is the place where we have to see how far we will be able to go. As it was pointed out by Professor Altbach, some of the private institutions are doing very well. Certainly there is no doubt about it. But the elite institutions in India are elite and academically doing very well. People talk only about the money part, only about the good teachers, well-trained teachers. These are part of the system. What is not adequately highlighted is that these are also brightest students, selective students. And if you take IITs, if you take JNU, if you take any of these institutions, it is not only because of the faculty and the money and the autonomy, but also you are dealing with the bright young minds, That is not the case when you talk about a massification of a system and you talk about a state universities, etc. So this is more a luxury. If you talk about social sciences, this is a luxury confined to the central universities, not to that extent the state university, with some exceptions. You find that in the NIRF ranking, some of the state universities are coming up very well. So that is the way that you find. But I think, and I think the battle where India stands as a loser or a gainer, which was touched upon by Professor Altbach, is that there is a battle for brains in the world in the context of globalization and in the context of knowledge economy. And in the battle for brains, what one finds is that India is on the supply side than on the demand side. If you look at the H-1B visa, and if you look at the cross-border transfer or cross-border movement of, I am not talking about the students, I am talking about the cross-border movement of the highly educated people. So what has happened is that in the knowledge economies, they had an option to produce or to develop their own people through higher education systems. But that is not the way that they try to do it. That is, it takes a long time. You cannot produce a master's degree person within 2 years. You have to wait for 18 years or 16 years. So that takes a long time. Heavy investment. And by the time 16 years, you are already remaining backward. So what they adopted is that collect the best brains from the world and bring them. Say for example, some of the migration policies are changed. If you have a postgraduate degree, you have higher levels of points that you get. And it's a point-based system whereby this is happening. And if you see H-1B visa, when it started in 1989 or 88, the cap was 65,000 employees. And nearly 49,000 to 50,000 of those who went under the H-1B visa were Indians. And you see even today, you find that a good share of this, So what is happening is that you don't invest to produce the capital, but you take the full profit out of it. That is the change that is taking place in higher education. And in terms of the change that you are talking about is that, in other words, it's a reverse flow of capital from the less developed countries to the developing countries. Higher education is used as a tool, and good higher education is used as a tool to transfer capital from the less developed countries to the developed countries. We talk only about the transfer from developed countries to the developing countries, but that is not the case. And if you talk in terms of the valuation of I am not talking about $38 billion that US is gaining as a result of the students. I am not talking about that. and talking about the real contributions that they are making and the salaries that they are receiving and the cost benefit analysis in Tilak sitting next to me. The cost benefit analysis, we find that this reverse flow and its implications are very important here. So I think so the battle for brains, India has to move from a supply side to a demand side. Whether we will be able to move to that side is one of the important dimensions of change, or if you are talking about the future of higher education and the return of many of these people who are abroad to Indian countries. Why I am making this point is that in the battle for brains, India and China were on the same side. But today, it is estimated that nearly 80% of the students who are studying abroad return to China. Whereas this percentage is touching 2 digits only in India, and that is lower levels of 2 digits, you know. So therefore, there are examples where countries made heavy investment in the public system and heavy public investment and made the institutions much better. And we find that these changes are taking place. Another dimension, sorry, you want to say? No, you can. I come later.
Okay, I just wanted to reflect on, to bring some kind of international data comments on what Dr. Verghese has been saying. Just a few interesting examples. A while ago, there was a study done about U.S. foreign assistance to the Philippines, which over many years has been fairly substantial. And it was discovered that actually the Philippines is contributing much more to the American economy than we have been contributing to the Philippines. Why? Because large numbers of nurses, doctors, and other professionals are trained in the Philippines basically for export. And this is one of their major industries. So they are supplying at very low prices, highly trained professionals to the U.S., much more than the aid going in the other direction. So that's one thing. The second point is, what Verghese is talking about is what we used to call the brain drain. And they should just go back and call it the brain drain, because that's what it is. And the rich countries are now very open about that. We don't call it the brain drain, but you've described it perfectly. You know, that it's talent going in from an Indian point of view, the wrong direction. Next point, China. We recently finished a book on academic excellence initiatives, 8 case studies from around the world. One of them, of course, China, which is the biggest one. It's available open access, so any of you can get a free copy whenever you want. And what we discovered in the data was that China has spent, over these several programs that Verghese has mentioned, about $100 billion US equivalent on these upgrades to build world-class universities. Now, that's about twice or more the amount that was spent by all our other case study countries. So the Chinese invested very heavily in building these small numbers of institutions. It also seems that they wasted a lot of money, because for that huge amount of money, they got 10, maybe, top research universities, and the rest of the 100 and so that they've invested in are very good, but they're not at the top of the value chain. So India functions in a very competitive global environment. Both of us have been, saying that, and just to look at it from an Indian point of view really doesn't work.
Thank you. I don't know whether I am monopolizing. I have 2-3 points more to make. If you have patience, I will. We have enough time, so I can go.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, why I asked for time is that I am more confident now because whatever I said, he is certified by Professor Altbach, you know. So that gives a lot of confidence to go ahead with the next one. You know, this issue, when you are at the top, you are lonely. Because many institutions, very limited number of institutions. What is the definition of elitism? If everybody has it, it's not an elite system. It remains an elite system when I have it and you don't have it. You look at the luxury good industry in the world. Even a small shirt may be costed if you go to Yves Saint Laurent or any of these and all other things. It will be costed $100, $125 for a shirt. Otherwise, that shirt may be costing $10 or $15. But if they make it $15, it is not elite or it is not exclusive, you know. So you find that many of these institutions, so what India has succeeded in doing, even when the system was very small, was that we have succeeded in creating barriers to entry to higher education institutions. And we have created barriers to entry to quality higher education. And the selection mechanisms and the screening mechanisms and the tests that you are talking about. Now we have a national testing service itself. It's developing as an industry. So all means that we are creating barriers to entry. But I have a different way of looking at it. So for example, if you take a football team, we need only 11 players to play the football. But if you see how many people you start with to get 11 top ranking players, maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000. So I do not define these bad institutions are waste. They were essential to create a competitive culture and competitive atmosphere whereby the best could be made or trained and developed. That's a way of looking at the wastage in education. The other way is that, you know, you talk about the dropout, the money that is spent or the money that is wasted. No, I'm not talking about it. Even the initial point that when I made, the cost and return should not be based only about the education, but also based on the contributions and the lifetime earnings that people are making. So that is the way, as Professor Altbach pointed out, what is happening or what are the gains made by United States, you know. So my point is that, so there is a need to see that in a system like India, it is very difficult. Why? What we have to compete or compare in India, unlike in many other countries, is that should we restrict education to the elite and remain reasonably good, or we should expand education by not providing what the elite institutions are providing. This also has a lot of implication for the financing and affordability issues. So for example, in the first 50 years of our planned development from 1951 to 2000, we were a slow growing economy with low gross enrollment ratios. And we had only 8.3 million students in the sector and only GR was only 8.4 in 2000. Then we find a sudden jump, a surge in enrollment, not because of the public investment, but because of the private entry, universities from 2002 onwards. And today, more than 70% of the students and 75% of the institutions are private, both in aided and unaided included. So that is the structure, that is a change that has taken place in this century as a result of the change in the policies, because previously private universities were not permitted. What we had was a system, very important to note, what we had was a system of capitation fee colleges. Tilak has written extensively on these issues. And what you find is that in the capitation fee colleges, and many of them are getting closed down. Engineering colleges in Tamil Nadu are getting closed down. And in many of the engineering and management courses, in many of the universities, do not have enough enrollment. It's less than 50% enrollment. But for the 2009-10 fee reimbursement scheme that was introduced in Andhra Pradesh, first in Andhra, in many other places. So we have introduced a system, public financed private sector. It's a new sector that is coming up in India. So, but for that, many of these institutions would have been closed now. So the new trend that Professor Altbach explained is the limited number of private institutions. and the heavy investment that is made. The basic difference is that with 1 year or 2 years or even 5 years or 10 years, the investment made by these private institutions cannot be recovered from the students. So that perspective is very different. But when we are talking about capitation fee colleges, we were talking about a system where the quid pro quo or the returns should be immediate. So there is a difference. The other difference is that private sector was mostly running teaching shops, if I can use a loose term to express the right idea. So you find that it was they were running almost a teaching shops, and the quality was questionable. There is no doubt about it. But today, you look into the private sector, the institutions that Professor Altbach was referring to. The research is an important component, and if you see the amount of money that some of the universities that he named, I don't want to name any university, the faculty members at the lecturer level, the amount of funding that they get and opportunities to go abroad, to present papers, etc. I don't think that we have a best institution like JNU, where a professor in JNU with all these things is provided by that. So what I mean to say is that there is a change that is taking place. The knowledge production, previously private higher education institutions were engaged only in knowledge of transaction, that too not even an effective way of transaction. But today they are also equally contributing to knowledge production that is taking place. So I mentioned in one of the other seminars, since there is an issue of autonomy, etc. What is happening to public institutions is that autonomy and financing is put as an option. Either you take autonomy or you take finances. And all public institutions are forced to say that we have to pay the salaries to the teachers, salaries to the employers, and we want to survive our lives. So we will submit our autonomy and take the finances. So this is the way that, because in the 1950s, autonomy with funding. So funding was not constrained. Now it is either autonomy or funding. Now we are coming to another stage. There are only no money. See, UGC, if you read UGC, you will find that they give a lot of instructions how it is to be done, but no money. So that means, you have recommendations without money. That is the next stage in the development of higher education and some of the regulatory bodies. The latest development in UGC is that you read, if anybody of you since you are research scholars, can do an analysis of the notifications that are brought out by UGC in the past 5 years and see that how many of them are related to education. So what is to be done for October 2nd, what is to be done for August 15th, what is to be done for this day, what is to be done for other divas, etc. And if you see that, so what is happening is that the most important regulatory body has deviated substantially from the educational concerns. And this is getting percolated to that. I think this is a big challenge. This is a big danger. And this will have a harmful impact on the education development in the country. Of course, mention was made about the new education policy and accreditation pattern. There will be changes that are made. And in India, we have every capacity to speculate, intellectual capacities to what I mean to say, find shortcuts or alternative routes. So when we had NAC established in 1994, in the last 28 or 29 years of its existence, only around 33% of the universities and less than 20% of the colleges are accredited. Now, even within those accredited, if you consider that, initially there were certain allegations about this. So previously it used to be that 70% of the grades that are allocated will be based on visit and 30% will be based on quantitative numbers, what they call quantitative metrics. Then because of this, our good faith and better conviction of doing something which is not right, what we changed, we are forced to change this weight. Now we have 70% quantitative metrics and 30% for the visits. And if you read the newspaper for the newspaper related to this news in the last 1 or 2 years, there are quite a lot of allegations. Some of the institutions got suddenly A double plus, and some of them went from B to double plus. This is like direct heavy license. In India, in some states, previously we should have a license for a car, then only we get a heavy license to drive a truck. But some of the states in India introduced a direct license for heavy license. So there are people moving in the heavy license route. And you find that there are criticism. Now, what is the latest thinking is not yet implemented. That there will be binary. That means you are accredited or not accredited. So that is a change that is taking place, friends. There are quite a lot of other issues which will be interacting at a later stage. I don't want to take too much of time. These are some of my comments that I made. So that's what I said. Okay. Sorry if I have taken time.
No. Thank you, Varghese. Thank you, Varghese, and thank you, Professor Altbach. I wish to defer my role as a commentator towards the end and make these two great presentations for questions, comments, and for the floor. Yeah, you please identify yourself and also make the questions short, and comments are also very full.
Please send the subject, sociology, economics.
Thank you, Professor Altbach and Professor Varghese, for the wonderful presentation. I am Shayantan. I am from IIT Jammu. Presently, I am teaching there. Previously, I was with NIPA. My background is educational sociology or something similar. Okay. So the topic is where is it going, or where are we heading? And also, I think it leads towards who are leading. Professor Varghese has briefly touched upon this area about the trendsetters. Now, if you look at the recent trend that public universities, that's what Professor Varghese mentioned, is that public universities, the funding, not only for the professors, but definitely also for the scholars and the students, have reduced drastically. On the other hand, the private universities, the good ones with good amount of reputation, the leaders in the market or leaders in this field, are, as Professor Altbach has rightly mentioned, have good amount of autonomy, a very good amount of money, and also kind of the trendsetter in leading the discourse. If you go to the conferences, the academic conferences in recent years, you will find that there are more number of students and scholars fully funded by the private universities are coming to the institutes, and less number of students from JNU and any other good reputed public institutes, I'm not saying any public institute, reputed ones, are lesser and lesser in number. So I am questioning the quality in the quality higher education. So where we are heading is also defined by who are heading, who are leading, who are the trendsetter. So if this is going to be the trend, what are the consequences? Because even in private universities, the good ones or the reputed ones, even if somebody says something critical, they are very easily cut off from the system or threatened or things like that, which have been happening in public institution. But the difference is that in public institution, people have the right or kind of keep on saying it. Whereas private institution works very fast and very swiftly to set the trend again back to where it should be according to the power and leadership. So if this is going to be the way forward, where are we heading in terms of quality in the quality higher education? So that's my question.
So let me say that, if you're looking at the future, what you're saying is absolutely true. That is also, I was trying to make it, where you made it more explicit, and thank you for that. See, basically what I feel is that one of the contributions of new education policy will be that the public institutions, majority of the public institutions will be pushed out of the competition in higher education. Why I'm making this point? New education policy makes a point that there will be foreign institutions coming and starting branch campuses in India. So the competition will be between the elite private institutions, which Professor Altbach highlighted in his presentation, and the foreign branch campuses. They will be struggling not for battle for brains, battle for money. Who will get more money? If you have a foreign branch, you can charge more fees. This is an experience that you find in many developing countries, you know. For foreign collaboration, you can levy heavy fees. So the levy fees charging institutions in the private sector, which are some of the elite institutions in the private sector, and the elite institution, or the institute, not elite, need not be elite, the branch campuses, the top ranking world universities are not coming to India, and they will not come. Because they do not rely on that. And secondly, what is also to be understood is that when Indian students are willing to go abroad and pay in dollars, why should they come to India and earn in Indian rupees? Because Indian students are going abroad to earn in dollars. So why should foreign universities come to India to earn in Indian rupees, you know? This is and secondly, the issues related to repatriation of the surplus. I cannot use the term profit, because if you use the term profit, you have to be registered under Companies Act, not under the Universities Act. So all these are, we can make surplus and don't make profit in the universities. That is an unwritten rule in India and in many countries for that matter, you know. So therefore, this competition takes place, and it
Surplus is being allowed in the new regulations.
Surplus is surplus is allowed.
Repatriation of surplus.
The regulations regarding repatriations are not clearly defined. It is permitted. It is not defined. Why I am making this point is that there are 43 foreign institutions in South Africa. When I studied about South Africa, the foreign institutions, and South Africa brought one rule, I think in 1998 or 2000, I don't exactly remember, stating that if you are making profit and repatriate it, you should register under the Companies Act and pay tax. And out of the 43, 39 institutions closed their shop the next year. So what is their interest, whether it is an educational interest or financial interest or a profit motivation? There are many examples globally we can cite about it now. So therefore, where are we going? We are going to a system whereby those who are the graduates from the elite institutions, they will not find unemployment. The insurance of unemployment is systematically transferred to the graduates who are from the institutions, the state institutions, where we say that so-called quality is very poor. And indirectly, it has a social implication. And what is the social implication? Students from the disadvantaged groups and the lower economic status people are mostly going to these places, or in other words, this process of development of higher education, massification, and the change that is taking place will certainly have a long-term social and economic implication, whereby the incidence of unemployment is systematically transferred to the poorer people, to the lower people, but they have degree. So it is not a question whether you have a master's degree. The question is asked, if you say that you have a master's degree, from where did you get the degree? So that is the question that is asking. That becomes an important dimension. That is the direction in which we are changing and we are moving.
You should also see that there are many hands. So if it will be brief, it will be good, I think. Many can do.
Hi, good evening. I am Jyoti Arora, doctoral student from Zhces Science Center, and I'm currently working in the area of institutional and academic autonomy. So I have two questions. One is related to the idea of world-class university, excellence, and ranking. So the problem that I'm really struggling with is when we see rankings as an end to achieve the idea of world-class university and excellence rather than the means. I see that even some of the private elite institutions have started strategizing, or to say, to invest strategically in terms of shortcuts. So what is the future for these kind of institutions? How sustainable they are? Are they really becoming excellence, moving towards excellence and world-class university, or is just the ranking ladder that they want to claim for? And the second question is this dilemma that Professor Verghese pointed out to, whether India needs to expand or be restricted to the elite. So this is in regard to the vision of New Policy on Education 2020, which on one side says about the universalization of higher education, but also talks about the world-class universities. So is it contradictory, the vision itself, or what kind of implications it can have for Indian higher education sector? Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for the wonderful. So when we are talking about the internationalization of higher education,
Introduce yourself.
my name is Bhupendra and I am a PhD scholar at Center for Political Studies here in JNU. When we are trying to talk about the internationalization of the higher education, you see, when we see India and its higher education system in the background of new liberal education system, and see how US-led neo-colonial knowledge system is creating the unequal ground for countries in the global south to perform on global standards. I was wondering why the individuals are compelled to move out of India for higher education abroad, and how do they reproduce the existing socio-economic inequalities. So my question is coming from that perspective where we often try to miss the international political economy perspective when, of the higher education itself, and how it plays into creating these unequal power structures within. Thank you.
Hello sir, my name is Arun. I'm from Zhces doing my PhD. Actually sir, a lot of talk happened about the elite universities. So my question is way simpler. When we say that private higher education institutions are doing a way better in the current education environment, but at the same time they only represent a tiny section of Indian society. So if your education is not fulfilling the aspirations of the whole, how can it be truly represent the actual picture? Does new education policy have any kind of provisions to tackle these questions?
There will be here one. You are asking.
So my name is Arya. I'm from Center for East Asian Studies, SIS. So mine is a little bit different from Indian education system.
School of International Studies.
So I'm doing my PhD in Korean internationalization of higher education, South Korea. So my question is, so when we look at internationalization of higher education, we say that the process, it is increasing, the number of students going abroad is increasing. But if we look at South Korea particularly, we can see that ground realities are different. Like people there faces a lot of cultural differences, and many domestic students are not willing to talk to other foreign students. So in this situation, like there is a reverse trend happening. So what is your opinion about what we can expect in the future in this aspect? Thank you.
We'll have a second round of questions after this reply or response to some of these issues raised.
To be honest, I don't know what the last question was asking. I mean,
The last question about Korea. If you
about
can
Korea,
read
but I understand it's about Korea, about which I'm not an expert.
There is a reverse flow of students and refugees to Korea now. Previously, they were sending a large number of students abroad. So that's it.
Well, maybe just to briefly answer the last one first. Korea, of course, like Japan, is having a demographic cliff at the moment, with a rapidly declining population, and quite a number of the private Korean universities are going out of business as we speak, and some of them are trying to survive by recruiting students from other countries. So this is I think, the main focus of Korean internationalization. I might point out in the United States as well, in certain parts of the country, we also have demographic problems, and some of our not very good private universities are also trying to rely on international students simply to survive. So, that's a trend. Why are Koreans not going abroad? I don't have a good answer to that question. Maybe it's a good research topic for you. A few comments on rankings on world-class institutions. I always say to audiences which bring up rankings, which is almost every audience, don't pay so much attention to the rankings. The global rankings only measure a tiny elite part of the system. There are about 25,000 universities in the world, not counting the 45,000 Indian colleges. And the rankings rank about 1,200 or 1,300 of that total number. So it's a tiny part. And to compete with the top ones is very, very difficult. I had the really interesting experience of being for about 5 years on the Russian government's Excellence Commission. They called it the 5-100 program, and what they wanted to do is to have 5 Russian universities in the top 100 by the year 2025. They failed completely, but the program actually was relatively successful because it imbued in the 22 Russian universities that we selected, and the government, we spent about $2 billion US dollar equivalent there, lots of reforms. And more autonomy was given and so on. I could give a whole lecture on that. But I guess my main point is, you're competing in a very competitive world and you're not going to really succeed because the rest of the world is also doing the same thing and spending more money than you are and starting, generally speaking, ahead. So it's a difficult context. We could have an entire seminar, and knowing JNU a little bit, you probably are, about neo-colonial theory and practice and what it means. And I don't want to, I can't go into it here, but it's certainly the case that for the last 150 years, both through real colonialism and through the intellectual domination of the West, and in the post-World War II period, largely of the US and to some extent the UK, our intellectual values are the global intellectual values. You can argue whether this is bad news, but it's true, it's reality. And how to decolonize, there's a big debate these days in the area of higher education and broadly about coloniality and what it means and how to decolonize and so on. Much of it goes over my head, but lots of discussion about that. And one final comment, sort of related to one of the questions, and that is to have a higher education system that serves society, it needs to be a differentiated system. That is, you need to have different kinds of institutions adequately funded that serve different parts of the population. And I frequently think, not because I'm a colonialist, but because I think it's true, that the California system in the United States is a very good example of how such a system works, where they have community colleges at the bottom, which are largely vocational in focus, which are open to anyone who has a high school diploma, and awards a 2-year degree. And you have teaching-focused universities in the middle, the California state system, which focuses on teaching much more than on research. And then at the top, You have the University of California system, now 12 campuses, Berkeley and Los Angeles and ones that all of you know, which are top-ranked research universities. In fact, if you separate out California from the United States, they probably have 20% of the globally ranked higher education institutions in the whole country. But that system works very well, and there's mobility up the system. That is, if you're a bright young kid from a poor family, you go to a community college, you do well, you want to earn a 4-year degree, easy. Legally, you can transfer up in the system, even to the top of the system. So all countries need that. Few countries have it. The Germans sort of have it, but without the ability to transfer up with their Fachhochschulen, their universities of applied science. This is necessary. India does not have such a system. And I think the underinvestment and lack of respect for the vocational higher education, post-secondary education sector in this country is one of the fundamental problems in the country. So.
Thank you very much. Jyoti, I am not responding to your question because it is very well answered. Bhupinder, you have the question of knowledge inequality. I think you cannot keep your eyes closed to the reality of knowledge inequality. And I don't think that this knowledge inequality will be equalized all of a sudden. If you see the research, R&D investment that is taking place in the universities, and the knowledge is produced mostly in the developed countries. R&D efforts, and if you see the percentage of R&D expenditure in different countries, you will find that, and also it is contributed by the private sector and also by the public sector, to reach the GERD to 5%. Now you will find that. Even the Lipson conference said that 2.6% of the total R&D expenditure should come from the private sector. So there is one thing, that inequalities are there. What we need to try to do is that we should go step by step to level up, to ensure that how we can reduce the knowledge inequalities. So say for example, India is ranked in terms of 3 or 4th, depending upon the reference that you are making in terms of the publications. But in terms of citations, India does not come close to that. I think perhaps it is 15 or 16. Sorry?
It's after 9.
So it is quite below. So therefore there is a need to look that we are trying to improve the quality of the publications, of research that you are trying to do, and this is the way to reduce. And secondly, it is very important to see that we should not have a biased view against the knowledge that is produced anywhere. That is something that we have to see, and I find this trend is coming up. I will read only certain things, and I myself is biased. I will accept only the biased knowledge. And it is important to see that if you want to reduce knowledge inequalities, we should have open mind towards the knowledge that is produced. Knowledge transcends nations without any cost. But knowledge producing institutions are national in nature. Knowledge is global, but knowledge producing institutions are national. So the issue of interactions, transactions, or credit transfer, all these issues are concerning institutions producing knowledge. That is not per se knowledge. Knowledge itself is a public good, that is 1954 Nobel laureates, he got Nobel Prize in 1970. That's a person, I forgot, I forgot the name. No, the first Nobel Prize winner. Foundations of Economics. Samuelson, Paul Samuelson. So 1954, famous article. That is my answer to the question. We should keep an open eye and open mind towards the knowledge produced anywhere. But you choose what you want. I'm not saying that. But don't be selective in the initial stages. You be selective at the later stages in terms of it. I think Arun has made aspirations of society. As it was pointed out, diversity is the answer to, diversity of post-secondary education is an answer to keep the aspirations of the people. So for example, the debate regarding skill, now you find skill universities. And 50 years ago, nobody would have bought the idea of a skill university. Universities are not meant for skill training. Perhaps they are not the best organizational arrangements to provide skills, because who are the university professors? We all are the people who escaped from soiling our hands with the practical things, Now, if we become people who will be imparting skills which are required in the industry, it is very pathetic. The industry situation is very pathetic. And secondly, universities are not meant for business. Universities have a wider mandate. So for example, when India started institutions of management, we did not call it business school. We called it Indian Institute of Management. But when the private sector started in Hyderabad, it is called Indian School of Business. So there is a difference in the perspective from which we look at the institutions and what they are trying to do. So therefore, my question is, diversity is the answer, and not only that, it should be combined with affordability. The issues related to where should we place skill development and what type of skill is to be produced. Is universities the right organizational arrangement to produce skill? These are very broader issues related to aspirations, because aspirations also vary widely, substantially in different societies and within the society depending upon the socio-economic background of the students. One more footnote to what Professor Altbach said about the Korea. So Korea used to be the third largest country to send students to study abroad. And many of them used to come back. It is not like in India, Indian students, So Indian students go for studies abroad, they do not return. The return rate is very low. That is not the case. In Japan also, the return rate was very high. And one of the reasons is that, firstly, employment is available. Secondly, the salary levels in Korea and in Japan are substantially high. And the wage difference between the Korean system and that of the United States system or the UK system is not sufficient, does not provide sufficient incentive for people to migrate. This, apart from the language advantage that Indians have, which they are capitalizing, and the language disadvantage that Koreans and Japanese people are having. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boris. There are some more hands raising. Pradeep, I'll take you last. From the last side.
Thank you, sir. My name is Arjun and I'm from Zhces Center. My question is that this idea of world-classness of the city is not confined to the universities only. We are seeing it happening in the case of Delhi for last 2-3 decades, that we are trying to make Delhi a world-class city, and now it is coming to the roads of India. Now they are becoming world-class roads. So I just want to understand that the sort of violence that is being committed in the universities in the name of world-classness, the sort of violence that is being committed in the slums in the name of making a city world-class. What is this idea, and what is this idea of world-classness that we are so fascinated about? Another question that I have, that is this idea of world-classness, is who will be studying in this world-class cities, and is it worth it, the kind of violence that is being inflicted upon the universities, the political voices that is being suppressed, and the fund that is being cutted, and all that is happening in the name of world-class? Is it all worth it? Because perhaps a lot of universities, this is our, for a lot of people like me, this is our first time. We are the first generation learner. We are coming to this first time to this universities. We don't know what is world-classness of the university. So, thank you.
Good evening to everyone. Hello, I am Jandhyala. I am doing my PhD from Department of Education, University of Delhi. Actually, I was waiting for questions relating the curriculum and higher education. So no one has raised. So I I'm trying to bring these questions. So while we are talking about the too much bureaucratization or too much narrowing the learner university autonomy or higher education autonomy, what is the scope of looking the curriculum into the higher education? Because someone talked about only finance or some administration. So how do you look the curriculum? Like for example, some university have some unique curriculum. Like while this educational studies, while someone is talking about the education studies, so there are some differences. So is that curriculum is going to matter in the while we are talking about the internalization of education or not? So I want to hear that.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ankita, and I'm doing my master's in education and development from NIPA. So I have two questions, and first I'll ask my questions, and then I will give you the background, what made me think of these two questions. So the first question is, does internationalization of education, of higher education, only be the concern of people who are related to education or Ministry of Education, or other departments should also intervene and participate in the process? And this takes me back to the question with which we have begun this discussion of locating India's higher education in global context. I think the question should be, it should begin from locating India, not only the higher education, but first India in the global context. And what made me think of this question is Professor Verghese was also mentioning how why students prefer to go abroad and then not come back because of the dollar and the flow of dollar and comparison of dollar and rupee, because it is also related to the economy and what is the status of Indian economy in today's context. So these two questions.
Hi, I'm Yusuf Ali. I'm working on EdTech and higher education. I'm from sociology department here. So my question is that, like, when we approach higher education in India, like whatever I have heard so far is like a state perspective, like from policy and the state apparatus side. But like in my PhD's research also, I'm looking into the EdTech platforms in South India, where like one interesting trend I have seen is like how communities are directly negotiating with education. Earlier we had a like state mediating between the communities and education. Now through the privatization and neoliberal reforms, communities have got a capacity to deal with the market directly, and we can see like new emergence of new centers and shift from centers like Delhi to the other parts in the country, and how the strategies are emerging. So like Professor Verghese mentioned about these shortcuts, like in specific to a lot of debates around like study abroad. Like now it has shifted from study abroad to go abroad. Like how these kind of strategies are mediated and negotiated by the community itself, and how they are imagining the future of higher education from a community point of view. How we can address these kind of issues in context of India.
Hello everyone. I am Amarnath. I am a research scholar in Department of Higher Education at NIPA. I have two questions for both professors. My first question is to Professor Altbach. Professor, you said that we should not pay attention to rankings, but I think the fascination towards ranking is growing day by day. And the ranking exercise is primarily done by private news agencies only. Can there be any intergovernmental arrangement for rankings, or can there be any alternative to these market-oriented ranking exercises? And my question to Professor Verghese is that, sir, you talked about micromanagement of universities by UGC. How do you see the micromanagement and its implications on autonomy and academic freedom by the upcoming inception of agencies like HECI and HEFA? Thank you.
My name is Shreya. I am a PhD research scholar from IIT Jammu. So my question is as following. The institutions of eminence and national importance in India are apparently holding the responsibility of knowledge production, or at least that is what the skewed pumping of government resources indicate. But with the limited academic freedom, also rightly pointed by Professor Altbach, departments like social sciences in particular are not able to flourish. This is also evidenced from the recent talks that have been cancelled in numerous institutions. I'll avoid taking names. So with the selective knowledge production that is happening, maybe still in STEM subjects in across IITs, who knows, because again, funding is governed and shaped by a lot of factors. The question is that with the present model that we have, with HSS research particularly getting hindered, do you think that institutions of national importance in the future would actually be sustainable?
Very quickly. So I have Professor Albert says that we should have a differentiated system. I have a very serious doubt on that actually, because if you are looking at it came from an answer of a neoliberal idea of looking at universities. Now you said that we should have different universities or institutions for vocational education, teaching-based education, or more research-oriented education. But if you look at the trend, it is more towards where the money is located. It's not that we don't have the metrics to measure the teaching or the vocational measurements, but we know that the money is located where the research is located, the funds are coming from. Even the institutions of national importance like IITs and IIMs, we give huge importance to external funded research because the institution takes a cut for every consultancy or every project and every other funding. And even in public institutions like JNU or any other, there is a huge pressure on self-funded courses and money generation. Now, the question is that if you are following this differentiated system, aren't we going to again focus on the research institution only, ignoring the rest, the vocational and the teaching, because the money is located there? So are we not reinforcing the whole idea of that richest of the fittest in the higher education system? So that's the question.
So the idea here is the discourse so far I am listening is the internationalization is about education. Internationalization of higher education is more of education discourse. But how much it is about non-education discourse? Because when I visited this Harvard, I found even less than 500 meters away from that best university, we are finding several other universities are coming up where many Indian students are lying. So it's not necessary that they are going for very good quality education. I am not saying everyone. Some of them are going for other purposes also. And it is important to see non-educational discourse or non-educational component of this internationalization. So they may be going for a better life there. And this is giving a path to them to reach there. And that's what is happening. And there is a different kind of market emerging there to attract those students. And I have interacted with those students, several of them, to understand this phenomena. I have looked at those universities. I went to several of them, not the best one, also the worst one. And I found that this discourse is going on. So there are many other aspects of social, civic life in that context. And this is only a pipeline to take them that place. So we should have a discussion on that as well.
Thank you very much. I think we will now respond from the speakers.
You'll have to forgive me because I can't keep all these questions in my mind at the same time, but I'll try. The last question. The motivation for international study is of course varied, as exactly you point out, and a lot of it, in the case particularly of people from South Asia, is migration. Yeah. So they go to study, yes, but they go to migrate even more, and that's probably your experience. I have talked to people who work at the pharmacy in my neighborhood, who are all from Nepal, and they were once students, a number of them. So you're quite right, and it's complicated. And if you look at the Canadian case, it's currently a big crisis in Canada, actually. This has come to the fore. Now, the question about differentiated systems, it is not the case in many countries, maybe it is here, but it is not the case in many countries, that all the money goes to the research-oriented institutions. California is an example, Germany is an example, the Netherlands is an example. There are lots of them where the vocational end of the system is adequately funded by the state, and in the US case also by individual tuition payments, which are quite separate from the research universities. So it is possible and not that difficult, and many international examples to do that. The question about academic freedom, yes, China has this issue, of course, because there is kind of no academic freedom in the soft sciences in China, and yet they have very good internationally ranked institutions with strength in the STEM areas, but they've weakened themselves by limiting autonomy and academic freedom. What will be the case in India? I don't know. I'm not here. But it certainly isn't an advantage in terms of building a really top institution, whether you want to call it world class or not. Yes, it's true that two of the three global rankings are done by for-profit companies, both British-based. The third one, the Shanghai rankings, is done by a kind of a not-for-profit foundation in Shanghai, and that's the most interesting ranking, actually. We could spend a whole semester on rankings, but that's true. There is in Europe a European ranking, which is not-for-profit, funded by the EU reasonably, but not totally successful, which is called U multi-rank. And it's aimed at providing students with choices based on a variety of variables that they can look at. So it's not only for profit. Curriculum, of course, very interesting and fundamental question. Curriculum has never been part of the world-class debate, other than to advocate for having interdisciplinary studies of various kinds. And I think that's a weakness. But you're right in pointing it out. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I will take one or two questions from this. One, let me start by saying that what Dr. Pradeep, what you asked. See, there was a study done. I have written an article on that. There was a university called Tri-Valley University in the United States. Tri-Valley University. It had 3 institutions. It was found that in one of the universities there were only 52 students when the survey was conducted. Total students, I am not talking about the sample. There were only 52 students. Out of 52 students, 46 students were Indians. Out of 46 Indian students, 44 were from Andhra Pradesh. So then there was an inquiry that was made why. And somebody visited the university and found that no student is around. Then they found that it is human trafficking is the main business, and education is a cover for the human trafficking that is made. Then some of the people said that to reach there, not the fees, for human trafficking, they had to pay around 10 lakhs Indian rupees to take a student from India to there. And ultimately, the state intervened, and as a result of that, these universities are closed now. And what is important for us to understand, is that, don't think that internationalization is corruption free. I don't know how you heard about a term called degree mills.
Yes.
Degree mills are bogus institutions giving degrees. You are getting a degree from an institution, but such an institution doesn't exist really. And so you come from the United States and say that I have a degree from this university, but perhaps that university does not exist.
Internationalized, not only in India but also in other places.
And you should also understand that it is estimated that there are around 600 degree mills in the world. And United States have more than 50% of the degree mills. So it is not only that America produces the best Harvard and Stanford and all other best institutions, they also produce the largest number of bogus institutions and bogus degrees, So what I mean is, don't have this feeling that, it's internationalization is corruption free. If a degree is coming from United States and UK, these are corruption free and we are all corrupt, That should not have. We should have a little more open mind to see how the degrees are coming, etc. One is, there was a question that was asked by you, whether the institutions of importance will survive. I think it should survive and we should publicly support so far as possible. Because that is the pointer to the future in terms of knowledge production. See, one trend that you find in India is that knowledge production has systematically moved away from universities. And those, since most of us are from social sciences, what you find is that if you look at the publications in EPW and if you look at the publications in many academic journals, one trend that you find is that, ICSs are institutions. ICS are established 29 institutions in 1969. And you find that these are mostly research institutions, good research institutions. And you find that increasing number of research publications in reputed journals, respected journals, are not coming from the universities. It is also coming, increasingly it is coming from the research institutions. So there is a trend of moving away research, and universities become the curriculum transaction rather than knowledge development. So we have to arrest this trend. National institutions and these elite institutions that we talked will be of very, very good from that point of view. I did not say that UGC is micromanaging. But UGC is making notifications on a very regular basis which are not academic oriented. Let me also say that as a former Vice Chancellor, working very closely with the ministry day in and day out, I can confidently say something. Autonomy is not something to be granted. Autonomy is something to be exercised. That depends upon the Vice Chancellor mostly and the top management team. And one advantage that you find in India is that India is so inefficient administratively. This inefficiency is the best opportunity to exercise. So if you want to do something, you do it. Don't ask for permission. So for example, there are so much sand on the seaside. So if you want, you take the sand and there is no problem. But if you ask for, can I take sand? The IAS officer was suspended because of that. So if I ask, can I take sand? Don't ask. So these are ways of addressing the issue of autonomy. These are the ways of doing that. So I repeat, inefficiency of the Indian system is the best opportunity to exercise autonomy. Not because it will be granted to you, but you should exercise it. I am telling this from the experience. And moreover, you find that NIPA has a special status. It's almost going towards the ministry for everything. So this is the place and this is the experience, this is the lesson that I learned. I am not saying that it is the best lesson. So I will stop here.
Huh? Okay. Want to close it? Okay. Before I declare close, that is closed, let me take a couple of minutes. I will not take too much time. In fact, we have very exciting discussion, exciting presentations, and also exciting discussions on the floor on several vital issues. But I say that perhaps we didn't have sufficient answers to many of the questions that were raised. And that's also normal, of course. Such a kind of a topic that we have, we don't have unanimous, widely agreed answers to all the problems. But I would like to reiterate 2 or 3 points which were made, of course, earlier by both Professor Altbach and also Professor Zhces, and also by some of the members on the floor. Number one, I wish to refer to the public and private universities. One, I think public universities are large. Public universities are large in number. Public education institutions, a very small number of them are very high quality. Altbach made in the very beginning itself. There is a pinnacle, a few pinnacles in the vast mediocre higher education system. That's true with respect to the public education system. But that's also true with respect to private education system. I think that has to be pointed to be noted. Otherwise, we are giving an impression as if private universities are doing much better than the public system as a whole, which is not the case. In the private universities, again, we have more than 400 private universities in the country. And the 400 universities, perhaps hardly a handful of universities that you will count them as giving high quality institutions. At what cost is another question. Now, I would say in generalization, with a few minor exceptions, private universities necessarily charge a lot of money. Necessarily, and even private, very good universities of this kind that we refer to, charge a hell of money, and many people cannot afford it. But public universities charge much less. Perhaps many can afford it, but such good institutions are very, very few. So, in a sense, public institutions have at least given and also accepted twin objectives of promoting quality and also access to education, while private universities, by definition, have only one objective of perhaps efficiency, including efficiency in management and finances also, but not necessarily equity and access to higher education. So that's given that, I have to really understand how we can favor the private institutions or growth of the private sector as a whole in the system, even though some institutions are doing very good. So this, we have to really correct the impression very well, very clearly that there are only very, very few private institutions which are providing high quality but charging a hell lot of money. And there are a few public institutions which are charging very a small fraction of cost of higher education but providing high quality of education. And there are several other problems. In fact, many of the problems that we have with respect to higher education in India owe their origins to the private institutions. The rapid growth of private higher education that has taken place, particularly since the beginning of the 1990s. Private colleges, private capital for the colleges that Varghese referred to, and later we have private universities, private deemed universities, and all kinds of wide variety of private institutions are coming. Private open university also is also there in the country. So they are also entering into every sector, but I think the motives are very, very clear. And de facto, they are profit-seeking institutions, a large number of them, and they of course not. Only a very small fraction of universities are having good scholarship programs. I think that's also a point that Altbach made. Somebody's trying to say, a vast majority of the students are fully funded in a university. I doubt very much, except, unless it's a very major exception, or exceptional departments. One or two departments is quite possible, but not the university as a whole. Because it's very, very clear that they won't put the money at all from their own pockets, and the money has to be recovered. That's very, very clear. So let us see that particular issue. Now, what is also happening in the country as a whole is quality is becoming an important prerogative of the central institutions, central government institutions, which are very few. The central institutions of higher education, including universities, IITs, IIMs, etc., and several other places, of course, labs, and others. While equity and the widening of access has been the objective of the state institutions, or has been given the role to the states. The center has abdicated its role and given to the states. So states wanted to promote equity at least, so they have the fee reimbursement schemes, etc., where they have, but they are expanding higher education through or by extensively relying on private sector. So the expansion has been the task of private sector. The equity has been the objective of the state institutions, and the quality has been the objective of the center. And this is how the three main functions of higher education are split, are shared in this federal setup, center, states, and the private sector in a big way. And certainly, perhaps that's not really a desirable way, but I think that is what is happening. I think there are a couple of important questions that were raised about the world-class universities, starting with the point of do we need world-class universities, or what is meant by world-class. I think some people have also raised, not surprisingly, ideologically, what is world-class, why should we be worried about the world-class, etc., etc. Even if we put aside these ideological debates, I think it's important to note that world-class universities do not come cheap. We need heavy public investment. In fact, at one point of time, Phil, I think you may correct me, you wrote in a paper that in India, private universities can never become world-class universities. The scope is only the public system that you have. If that is the case, we need huge public investments if you want to develop world-class universities. And given that the resources are limited and are going to be limited, even if the economic growth takes place at 10% rate of growth, still the resources available to the higher education sector will not rise further or will not rise proportionately. In which case, the limited resources will be spent on, suppose if you want world-class universities, you will be spending on those few world-class universities and leave the rest with inadequate, highly inadequate funding, and they will also be, of course, forced to make different kinds of options, rely upon private sectors or privatization of the public services in the public institutions, which is also happening in a big way in many countries, and including in India, of course, quite significantly. So we have to have really a choice between these, but I think the choice is becoming very, very tough, because this globally competitive world, you need world-class universities, you need high ranks. I think president after president, prime minister after prime minister was stating that we should have world-class universities, and our universities should figure in the top global rankings. And hence we have these institutions of eminence and other kinds of institutions that are coming up. But I think the danger is very, very clear. The NAP, the National Education Policy, in fact, has proposed the research reclassification of universities, research universities, teaching universities, and teaching colleges. And it also clearly mentioned a hierarchy in the sense that teaching universities, research universities are on the top, then the second level institutions are teaching universities, and the third level institutions are teaching colleges. The hierarchy is very clear, in the sense that if you perform very well at a college, you can become a teaching university, and if you perform very well in the teaching college over the years, teaching university, then you can become a research university. While the classification is very good indeed, it has a good rationale, I think one of the rationale is to have developed these research universities into world-class universities eventually over the years. How much time we take, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. But we know very clearly, I think some critics have been some scholars have been critical about this, in the sense that given the political economy system and the policy system that we have, the public policy attention gets increasingly concentrated on the research universities, and the danger of the teaching universities and teaching colleges getting neglected would be very severe. And these teaching universities and teaching colleges being large in size relative to the research universities, the whole system, the average quality of the system of higher education would be really apparent. And I think that's an important point that I think we should recognize it. I think I've made some more points, but I think I'll stop here. Let me thank once again Pradeep for giving me this opportunity, and thank Professor Philip Altbach profusely for taking time to spend quite a few days in India and also in this particular university. Sorry? Sure. I'll give you a chance. You have the last word. But let us thank him very much for his very insightful observations on the higher education system. That we value very much. And thank you all for providing us a good platform for a very serious discussion on an important issue of concern to all of us, every one of us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Since I'll take the opportunity to have a last word, because I think what Tilak has said is, very important, and I would hope that we would all go away thinking carefully about what kind of top universities India needs. It's my strong view that really most every country, and especially a large country with such talent as this one, needs, forget about world class if you want, but needs serious research-intensive universities. Not all of them, but a number. I don't know what the proper number for this country would be. And public debate and appropriate funding is, in my view, absolutely mandatory to get to those kind of institutions as quickly as possible, to avoid as much of the continuing brain drain as possible, to make sure that Indian science is as productive as it can be and contributing to sort of global scientific development, to relate to industry and high tech and so on. And we have so much evidence from almost all countries where these kind of institutions, you may want to attack them as elite, but nonetheless are very important for economic development for the nation. So somehow, you guys got to do it. You know, that delaying and so on is I think, a deep problem for the future of the nation. So with that kind of depressing thought.
Well, I think I'm a close follower of Professor Altbach's writings. I think one of his papers perhaps in Indian media, Indian newspapers, he has made it very, very clear that what we need is, India needs, and perhaps many other countries require, is a world-class system of higher education, but not a few world-class universities. We have to develop a whole system of higher education which is of world-class nature. So a larger number of universities of high quality have to be. In fact, the quality is now very poor, so almost all the institutions require big scaling up in terms of investments for quality development, which would take them to higher levels and higher levels. So the system of higher education has to be converted into a world-class system, right, and focusing on a couple of universities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I now invite Varsha Shukla to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor, for such insightful talk. This talk definitely and perfectly summarizes what is going on in Indian research scholars' mind and in all of our minds who are sitting here. There are different thoughts, there are questions, concerns, worries, which are some of them might be answered, some of them still are open for further research, further questioning, further exploration. I would like now to, on behalf of our center, Zhces Hussain Center for Educational Studies, and all the participants, I would like to thank Professor Altbach for his crucial insights on Indian higher education and its placement in world class. I don't know how much of that we can say, but definitely we can aspire for that, and also its placement in global higher education. I now also want to thank Dr. Professor Tilak for facilitating this session. Facilitating this session and also guiding this session. We appreciate your contribution to academia and hope that you found the event to be a valuable learning experience. Professor Tilak has also made some important comments on Indian academia and the internationalization of education. Also, I would like to thank Professor Varghese, who is our guest of honor, and who made some very important remarks on Indian higher education system and the continuous transformation that it is going. Next, I would like to thank Dean, School of Social Sciences, and JNU administration for their cooperation in organizing this event. And I would also like to thank Professor Arvind Kumar Mishra, Chairperson, Zhces Hussain Center for Educational Studies. And lastly, to Professor Pradeep Kumar Chaudhary for organizing this event. And once again, Professor Altbach, Professor Tilak, and Professor Varghese for giving your crucial thoughts and enlightening us with your thoughts. Again, thank you everyone for taking the time to be here and being part of this discussion and listening to these eminent scholars. There is tea and refreshment outside, and also we can have a group photo after the tea. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Zhces Hussain Center for Education Studies, I welcome you all to our today's seminar on Indian higher education, where is it in global perspective. In recent years, especially with the introduction of National Education Policy NEP 2020, India's global aspirations in terms of its higher education has become evident, and it is in fact picking up at a rapid pace. Private universities in India are increasingly collaborating with foreign universities to offer various kinds of workshops, courses, and even joint degrees. And foreign universities and governments are also equally interested in expanding their influence in India. While the aspiration of internationalizing Indian higher education is certainly underway, we also need to critically reflect on not just how such an aspiration promises to meet the distinct social, cultural, and political needs of our society, but also to what extent this aspiration coincides or deviates from the current realities of Indian higher education, and how both the aspirations and realities of Indian higher education are perceived globally. It is this global perspective that we hope to address today through this seminar and hopefully ignite some vibrant conversations and exchange of ideas around it. With this, I now invite Professor Arvind Kumar Mishra to kindly welcome the audience and our distinguished guest.
Yeah, thank you, Sangeeta. Very good afternoon to everybody, and I welcome all of you to this important event in our center. And I am particularly very happy that three stalwarts working on Indian higher education and higher education in general are present. It is a rare occasion that you find three big scholars, on one platform. My colleague Dr. Pradeep Chaudhary will be giving detailed introduction about all of them, but it is my pleasure duty to welcome all three. So sir, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and we look forward to learning a lot from your experience, from your discourse. And let me do a pleasant duty to present a bouquet to our guests. So, yes, Sangeeta, can you give me that? So, Professor Philip Altbach. Professor Tilak. As I said that my colleague Dr. Pradeep Chaudhary will be giving detailed introduction about the program as well as about the speaker. So now may I invite Dr. Pradeep Chaudhary to come on dais and introduce the theme of the seminar.
Dear Professor Altbach, Professor Tilak, Professor Varghese, faculty colleagues, my dear students and friends, a very good afternoon to all. I join Professor Mishra to welcoming you to the center and to the seminar in particular. This is again I join with him saying that this is one of the rarest occasions for all of us, as we could be able to invite three eminent scholars working in the area of Indian higher education and development for more than 3 decades, to 4 decades I would say. Professor Altbach, Professor Tilak, Professor Varghese, three of them are working for a long time on Indian higher education and its development. So they have seen how actually the Indian higher education system has transformed over time. And we all have gained from their writings, readings and their discourse. We sincerely thank each of them for agreeing to join the event and to keep their views, which would certainly enlighten each of us. My task two. One is I need to introduce the chair and the speakers. Second one is I will introduce the topic a bit. But I feel that performing both the tasks in front of such eminent scholars are difficult. I am taking the risk of doing that. Let me first do my first part. I will be very brief in introducing each of the speakers. Else, the entire time allocated for the program will be less for this, even if I go for a detailed discussion, given the extensive work they have done in the area of higher education and development. Professor Tilak is a well-known economist of education in the country with the publication of over a dozen of books, and I would say that it is not less than 400 papers in the area of economics of education and development. He is former professor and vice chancellor of NIPA, now NIPA, National University of Educational Planning and Administration, and also ICSR National Fellow and presently distinguished professor at the Council for Social Development at New Delhi. He is also the visiting professor at IIT Hyderabad. Some of his he has published extensively in the area, and some of his recent publications include Economics of Engineering Education, recently came in 2024, higher education, public good and markets, education and development, critical issues in public policy and development, education and development, dilemmas in reforming higher education in India, trade in higher education, and many. He was the editor of the Journal of Educational Planning and Administration for a long time, and the articles that come from that journal shapes many of our thinkings or research in education and higher education. He also served as the president of Comparative Education Society of India and is on the board of Comparative Education Society of Asia as well. Professor Tilak served on several committees on education and related issues formed by Government of India, UGC, Planning Commission, now it is Niti Aayog, and many other international bodies. He is the recipient of several awards for his outstanding contributions to the field of education research. With all happiness, I wish to say that I got an opportunity to be nurtured by him as a scholar at NIPA, a capital that I will be holding for my entire life. Thank you, sir, for being here. Professor Altbach holds a long and distinguished research and teaching career in higher education, particularly in the area of internationalization of higher education. Currently, he is the Emeritus Professor and Distinguished Fellow at the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College, a great place for learning, I would say. In my recent visit to Harvard, I visited that place and I found it is so lively and fantastic that I would say that every one of us who are working in the area of higher education at least takes a pride of visiting that. Let's feel that we should visit that place, so vibrant place, and the collegiality, the discourse that happens in that place. And he is the brainchild of that center is the brainchild of Professor Altbach. So he has created a discourse, a different discourse in that place. He was also the Monan University professor there for a long time. He was the 2024-26 Distinguished Scholar Leader of the New Century Scholar Initiative of the Fulbright Program. He has been given several other international awards and prizes to him for his outstanding research in the area of higher education. He has taught at Harvard University, the University of Wisconsin, and the State University of New York. His book, Global Perspectives on Higher Education, is a well-read book by researchers and students in higher education. Even if you have at any case not seen that book, I must recommend that you should go. I have immensely benefited by reading that book. He also co-edited the book, The Road to Academic Excellence and also American Higher Education in the 21st century. Professor Altbach did his study from undergrad to PhD from the University of Chicago. Thank you, Professor Altbach, for joining with us, and we are always eager to listen to you. Professor N.B. Varghese is currently a distinguished professor at IIT Bombay and former Vice Chancellor of NIPA, New Delhi. He was the founding director of the Center for Policy Research in Higher Education, a think tank of its first of its kind, I would say, in the country in the area of higher education. Indian Higher Education Report is the brainchild of Professor Varghese that comes every year starting from 2015. I must say that this is an important reference for the students working in the area of higher education and development, and we must follow that, and I keep following it religiously, that report. We feel proud to say that Professor Varghese is an alumnus of our center, Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies, and we take privilege to say that, we take proud to say that he is doing, he has contributed so much of knowledge in the area of higher education, development, and social policy. He is the former head of governance and management in education at the International Institute for Educational Planning, IIEP in UNESCO in Paris. He has been the focal point for the Entrep Network, member of several international boards, committees, and editorial boards and journals. He was the chief editor of the Journal of Educational Planning and Administration and Secretary General of International Working Group on Education. He has directed research projects in several countries. I have read a lot of his writings in the context of Africa, Asia, and Latin America because he brings a very interesting global perspective to higher education. He has published several books and several research papers in the area of education and development. It's very difficult to say what are they because that is so long. Most of us will agree in this room, all are present, all of us, not most even, all of us will be agreeing to the point that we have benefited immensely from the critical writings and discourses these three eminent scholars have created in the area of higher education and development. And we are feeling proud to be inviting them to our center. Thank you, each of you again, for joining. Now let me get into the second part, which is topic. I am equally afraid of saying about the topic in front of three eminent scholars. But let me put my perspective, what I have done in my life, what I have understood in the last 10 years of my career after my PhD. The topic for the seminar, today's seminar, is Indian higher education. Where is it in the global perspective? The landscape of tertiary education globally has changed significantly over the years, and it is continued to change. Enrollment has been increasing in many countries, though in some countries it is also declining. In the other day, Professor Altbach was saying, because of demographic shifts. This is happening in parallel to the effects of globalization, demographic shifts, and technological advances. One of the significant recent development has been the growth of internationalization of tertiary education. Among many, this is one I find very, very interesting, and it is coming out very seriously in the policy discourse. There is a growing global movement of students, particularly from underdeveloped and developing countries to developed world. Indian Student Mobility Report 2023, which is titled as Beyond Beds and Boundaries, that estimates that the number of Indian students studying abroad was shockingly around over 1 million in 2019. It will likely be reached between 1.5 to 2 million by 2025. United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom and Australia are the most chosen destinations for Indian students. And almost 3/4 of the total students are going to these countries, if I am not wrong. As of 2023, there are approximately 850,000 Indian students enrolled across these 4 countries. The National Education Policy 2020, on which we have a greater amount of discourse now going on after it came in July 2020, that aims to attract greater number of international students to Indian higher education system, which is very low now. We have very less number of students in our higher education system who are from outside, and mostly those students come from South Asian and African countries. The policy aims to achieve the goal of internationalization at home by changing curriculum, also the credit system. High performing Indian universities will be encouraged to set up campuses in other countries, which is now also almost like started in some scale. And similarly, selected universities from outside will be setting up their campus here, so which is also visible to some extent. What I find across the globe, that there is a push for internationalization in almost everywhere. There is a high competition among countries to make their higher education globally competitive and also to attract students from other countries. Making money out of it is often said as the reason, what I have understood so far. Though there are several other motivations such as knowledge transfer, improving employability, improving skill, to mention a few. There are also debates on brain drain, and also brain gain and outflow of capital from developing to developed countries. So several questions and concerns are emerging in the area of internationalization of higher education globally, and certainly we need to create a well-informed debate on this issue. Without that, it's very difficult to understand actually what is happening in the internationalization of higher education. A few questions that comes to my mind, I think the panelists will definitely be touching in a sense, I know, given their expertise. Who gains and who loses in the process of internationalization? More importantly, who are the leading in this process? Who are the leader in the internationalization arena? Is it that only US, UK? But now we see that even people are getting into some Gulf countries to study. So who is the leader, and what is actually happening in the process, and who is losing and who is gaining in the process? Our developed countries are exploiting to developing societies in some way or the other. How it is impacting the other aspects of the economy and society in the global south. While economic motive is the main one, we often discuss what are the other motives of developed countries in attracting students from developing economies. Is it only that they are for revenue maximization or getting money, or there is something else in their mind to attract students from developing countries? That also not much being said. How, for example, how geopolitics play a role in it. What Professor Altbach was saying in the other day in a recent seminar that concluded by NIPA. Only it concluded yesterday. So there are many things, those are coming up in internationalization of higher education, and it's very, very important for all of us to lead that. So now we'll be getting into that discourse, and let's continue this discussion. As we have 3 eminent scholars in this area, I don't think we can have an alternative to this panel. I can't even think of an alternative to this panel to discuss these issues in detail. So I don't want to be in between you and the panelists. Even I am very eager to listen to them. So let us get into the topic, and then we can go ahead. Thank you again to all the 3 panelists for coming here, my teacher, my mentor. So it's always a great opportunity for me to talk here, though I am scared, but I took that risk to speak. Thank you very much.
Now I request Professor Tilak to kindly take over the session as the chair.
It doesn't work. Good afternoon, everyone. I take this opportunity essentially to express how distinctly and uniquely privileged I feel today to be here in this room, which I visited quite a few times earlier. But this visit is particularly significant as we have a great speaker, Professor Philip Altbach, in this session. And Professor Philip Altbach is not new to India, and India is not new to him. In the sense that he visited quite a few places in India. In fact, he worked for his PhD from India, from Daughters of Social Sciences, and has extensively worked. I had the privilege of knowing him long ago, knowing him in physical person a few decades ago, and knowing him through his readings, of course, much longer, and also got an opportunity to work on a couple of publications with him. And I indeed feel privileged with those opportunities that I got, and this particular opportunity today I have to listen to him. In fact, if you are looking for a global higher education policy analyst, I think we have a top-ranking person here with us today. That is Professor Philip Altbach. He is not only a global higher education policy analyst, I think he is also an important, very high-level higher education policy analyst in India, because his knowledge of Indian system is so deep and so insightful. So I'm really looking forward, along with all of you, to have his insightful, deep, sincere and serious comments on what is happening in India in the global perspective. Particularly in a context in which we are in, I think higher education can be described as in critical roads in India. We have a new policy on education which was introduced in 2020, which has a large package of reforms that have been suggested, some of which have been long overdue, and some of which have been criticized, hailed by many as heartbreaking, revolutionary, radical, and it will thoroughly transform the entire education system and also entire country. And some have also criticized it, saying that there are several problems with quite a few reforms that were suggested, and a few of them, in fact, I don't say a few, perhaps equally good number of them also condemned the whole power policy. And I'm sure Professor Altbach will comment upon some of these things. And I think he's closely following with many of the developments that are taking place in India now, particularly after the policy has been introduced. So let me not take much more time. And I'm also grateful to Pradeep for giving me this opportunity, in which my colleague Zhces is also here, apart from Professor Philip Altbach. And of course, I get a chance to see many of the young scholars of this center, of this JK Research Center here. Thank you very much, and let me not take much time and invite Professor Philip Altbach to give the very special address.
Thank you. Does this properly work? This work? Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your Saturday to come to this not very appealing room and participate in this discussion. So I appreciate that. We'll just do it this way. Thank you for trying. We have deep problems of technology here. I hope this is going to be a conversation and not a lecture, for several reasons. One is I'm not completely up to date on this topic. I'm going to make some generalizations about Indian higher education. Excuse me, I don't want to take too long, so I'm going to
it to be